بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Okay, so it says باب من سرق يسرق سرق ثمرا أو غير ذلك مما لم يحرز. Says somebody who steals fruit or things which are left unguarded. So the issue here is that there's a difference between ghasb and sariqa. Ghasb is a very broad category, which is misappropriation of wealth, intentionally, unintentionally, through trickery, through not trickery, through all sorts of things. That's called ghasb. That's a financial discussion, right? So we'll talk about it. For example, you were doing a car rental, okay? And it's stipulated in the rental contract that you can't drive past the speed limit. So now you drove past the speed limit. Your relationship to the car you're now a ghasib, you're now considered a thief because your use of it has broken the contract. You don't have a contract anymore. Right? So your financial relationship to the car is the same as a financial relationship between somebody who stole a car. Now, is your hand going to be cut off? No, your hand's not going to be cut off. Right? That's not a had punishment for those kind of things. What if you didn't realize it? Right? So the car under its rental was insured. Okay, you had a car crash, and they found out later that you had actually been speeding because you didn't know the difference between kilometers and miles. Okay, and it was kilometers an hour, always miles per hour, and you thought, oh, it's kilometers per hour, right? And so you are an innocent person, you're a good person, you didn't intend to speed into anything. They asked you, were you speeding? You said, no, sir, da 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 da. They found out based on the impact that you had to be speeding. So then they realize you're not insured, they realize this. They realize various financial repercussions of your action. That's a chapter in the Ghasb we're talking about in Mu'amalat, right? And obviously there's moral issues. If you misappropriated someone's wealth, right? Or you used it without permission or whatever. There's another discussion. So how we solve that financial thing is one issue. But here we're talking about the court case of sariqa, right? What is sariqa as a court case, right? And there's an issue between you and Allah, not between you and somebody else, not a financial issue. Between you and Allah and the society. Are you a sariq or not? Sariq is to take something of a particular value that is muhraz, that is stored in an appropriate way, right? Without any shubha, without any doubt in it. So we saw last week, for example, the slave stealing from his master. We said, oh, there's a shubha. That's like your own property, stealing from your own property. So he couldn't get his hand cut off, right? A wife stealing from her husband can't get her hand cut off because regularly his wealth goes to her. So it's kind of not very clear. Stealing from your dad, even though you might inherit from him one day, right? You can't get your hand cut off, right? But the key thing is it has to be stored appropriately, right? So what about this? I break into Shaya's house, okay? I go up into his bedroom. I look around for some jewelry. I get the jewelry, put it on the windowsill and open the window. I go outside and come from the outside and steal the jewelry from the window. When I took the money out of his the jewelry away from his property, was it stored appropriately? No. So therefore, I'm not a sadiq. Right? You can't have my hand cut off because I say, Your Honor, I'm in the court and say, this is what happened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, I broke into his house. I confess that. Yes, I moved his property from one place to another place. I confess that. Yes, I might be liable because I changed. It was stored and that's no longer stored. It's true, I might be liable, but I'm not a sadiq because it wasn't muhraz. It wasn't muhraz bihirzi mithlihi. It was not stored in an appropriate way. When I stole it, it was on the windowsill and the window was open. That's not how you store jewelry, right? So this is what this discussion is now. Is everyone following?
Yes.
All right. So just side point. Anybody wants to, break into someone's house, if you want to break into someone's house, you want to steal anything, come and talk to me first so I can give you a proper fatwa and make sure it's halal. doesn't become halal. It's not an issue of halal. The issue is, just like legalities, right? Legalities. There are legal loopholes in any legal system, right? And so there's ways around these things where this is not technically this is technically this, right? And those lines have to be there, right? There's no way out. So here's the question is, what if you stole fruit? Is fruit considered stored? Or something else that is not guarded? Like, how does it work, right? So you broke into an orchard and stole like hundreds and hundreds and thousands of dollars of fruit. Is that considered theft, right? Like, how does that work? So he says, أخبرنا مالك حدثنا عبد الله بن عبد الرحمن بن أبي حسين أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا قطع في ثمر معلق ولا في حريسة جبل فإذا آواه المراح أو الجرين فالقطع فيما بلغ ثمن المجن. Right? So Imam Malik, he said, Abdullah ibn Abdurrahman ibn Abi Hussein narrated. Now, concept in hadith, chain of transmission, as we know, right? Imam Malik narrates from somebody, from somebody, from somebody, from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay? If it's not a connected chain, meaning we don't know who these people are, or the person is not mentioned, then it's not considered a sahih hadith. Okay? That's one point. Second point is Imam Malik never narrates with less than two people between him and the Prophet ﷺ. Never. Right? So Imam Malik, who passes away in, I think, 171, if I remember correctly, 171. So he's 171. So he's probably born in the year maybe 100, right? Something like that, or maybe 95, right? So he's born a good 80 years after the Prophet ﷺ, right? So he's got to be born, and he's got to, become older, and then he's got to start studying with people. So imagine if he's studying in his teens, okay? There's there's a huge gap that he has to get through. So if he's ever going to narrate from anybody, it's going to be that with a very short chain, like two people between him and the Prophet ﷺ, it's going to be he's narrating from somebody who was very young when they were studying with the Sahaba. And that Sahabi lived for a long time. So where are you going to find that? You're going to find that with Nafi' and Ibn Umar. So Ibn Umar was young, okay? And Sayyidina Anas, right? So Imam Malik, for example, narrates from Nafi' from Ibn Umar, from the Prophet ﷺ. And in reality, Ibn Umar didn't necessarily hear all of those hadiths from the Prophet ﷺ. Right? So there actually might be a third person in the chain, but that person, because he's a Sahabi, it doesn't matter. We're not really, it's not a big deal. So he might be like Nafi' from Ibn Umar from the Prophet ﷺ, that's going to happen. Or from Zuhri. Zuhri is of Sigar al-Tabi'in, right? He's of the young Tabi'in. He studied with some Sahaba, but mostly studied with Tabi'in. Az-Zuhri, Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri. So Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri then studies with Sayyidina Anas. Sayyidina Anas lived for a long time. He died in 91, right? So you can imagine, Sayyidina Anas, he lived something like 75 years after the Prophet ﷺ. Like the world had totally changed, right? Totally changed. He lived through the Khulafa al-Rashideen. He saw the beginning of the Umayyads, right? Was he alive when they got to Spain? I don't know, right? I don't know, but that's the kind of chain that you're going to find. So when you see Imam Malik, it says so-and-so from the Prophet ﷺ, it's going to be something like that. How many people here do we see in the chain between Imam Malik and the Prophet ﷺ? So Imam Malik's source for this hadith is Abdullah ibn Abdurrahman ibn Abi Hussein. And he said that the Prophet ﷺ said. So how many people do we have in the chain between, how many people between Imam Malik? Just one. So we already know that that's impossible, right? We already know that that's impossible. We already know that there's somebody else. So this source, Abdullah ibn Abdurrahman ibn Abi Hussein, said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said it. He didn't say, I heard the Prophet say it. He said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is a tabi'i, Abdullah ibn Abdurrahman ibn Hussein. He's a tabi'i, he's not a sahabi. And he heard another tabi'i say that the Prophet that the Sahabi said that the Prophet said, or he heard a Sahabi say that. This is what's going to happen, right? So in reality, the sources are going to be one or two more people in the chain, or maybe even three, right? So this is called a mursal hadith, right? There's a gap in the chain there, a mursal hadith. Imam Malik's methodology is I trust Abdullah ibn Abdurrahman ibn Abi Hussein. I don't know what his source is. It doesn't matter. I trust him, so therefore I trust his sources. Okay? I trust him, therefore I trust his sources. And this is also the methodology of Imam Abu Hanifa. So this is Mursal Hadith, number one. Number two, this is applied in Medina by the Qadis and the Muftis in Medina. So therefore it is being gratified. So we have to understand that Imam Malik, he puts more checks and balances for a hadith than Imam Shafi does or Imam Ahmad. So therefore he can afford for his standards to be lower, because he's not going to give it the same power. Imam Shafi'i will put more conditions on the Sahih Hadith. Why? Because he's giving it more power. Imam Shafi'i comes along and questions a hadith like this and says a mursal hadith is not a proof because I'm going to give a Sahih Hadith a lot of weight. It's going to be able to do things. They're going to be significant things. It's going to change. Whereas for Imam Malik, I'm already putting criteria and saying, I trust the hadith because my sheikh said it and I trust him. I don't know what his source is, but that's fine. And number two, this confirms with Amal Ahmadina, so I don't have a problem. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right? So it's a common discussion when you talk about the Mursal Hadith, yay or nay, proof against. What do you mean by the Mursal Hadith? Right? So Imam Malik, for example, dealing with a gap in the chain in Medina is not like Imam Shafi'i dealing with a gap in the chain where the chain is much longer and the chain is in Kufa. Because in Kufa you find a lot of problems with hadiths, where in Medina you find less problems with hadiths. Right? So that's why some of the fuqaha, they'll say a hadith that is rated by Imam Malik with no chain is sometimes better with a hadith than a hadith that is mentioned with a chain that comes somewhere else. Because just the milieu that they're in, the environment they're in, how close he is to the Prophet, the kind of traffic that comes in, the kind of people there, it's very different, right? So it's a very different kind of scenario, right? Medicine that fell on the floor that fell on the floor in a pharmacy with one person there. Medicine that fell on the floor in a pharmacy with 1 million people there. Well, there's more people who could step on it. There's more mistakes that could happen. Medicine that fell on the floor in the street. Oh, it's different, right? So it's not always the problems that they're dealing with is not always the same kind of problem. Does that make sense, inshallah?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. So then he says, so obviously there's somebody else here, right? So there is to be no cutting off of a hand for fruit which is attached to the trees. Why? Because it's not considered stored. So yes, it's a crime. Is it considered sadaqah? No. Or for things, sheep and goats, stolen from a mountain at night. So I have sheep out on a hill. Right? They are not stored. So that's haram, of course, but that's not sadaqah. But when the sheep, are collected in their enclosure at night and the fruits are in their area for drying, that's considered stored now. Then amputation is for whatever amounts to the value of a shield. Right? And we'll talk about the value later on. Okay? So it says, so the whole issue here is, what is the definition of storing? Okay? And so this also then, when we're looking at this book, we're looking at fiqh, we're looking at hadith. The role of faqih is questions like this. When we study fiqh, we don't discuss sahih hadith, da'if hadith. That's not what we're discussing. That is not what you're supposed to get from the fiqh class, right? So in the fiqh class, you talk about problems like, okay, a definite when you say define sadiqah, and then you play with those definitions and see where they apply and don't apply. That's what we do in fiqh, right? It is constructive and creative. In hadith, it is deconstructive, right? And so when people come along and say, they're like, no, I just follow hadith. Like, what do you do with the hadith, Habibi? Are you analyzing the hadith? Or are you doing the fiqh of the hadith? And what you find out is they're not even doing fiqh at all, right? They're not doing fiqh, or they don't even know what's the game. They don't know what the game is, right? They don't know what the game is, and so they end up not benefiting. So in a fiqh class, we are playing with what's called masail, questions and problems. You're not necessarily expected to believe in all the problems or can agree with all the problems or anything, but we're just playing. We're getting this malaka, we're getting this faculty, this game, which is called fiqh, right? And so somebody comes along and says, "Oh, Hanafi fiqh useless, Shafi fiqh useless." It's like, and because it goes against this hadith. Like, we're not talking about the hadith right now. That's not even what we're talking about. Yes, we will talk about it sometimes. That does come into discussion sometimes, but that's not the fundamental game that we're playing. We're playing with these kind of things. So we have to understand, what do you get from fiqh? What do you get from hadith? And when you converge the two, you get neither nor, right? And this is one of there was the sheikh, a very famous sheikh, recently, and he was talking about he's Hanbali allegedly, and he's like, in my, I don't like teaching this book. I like teaching this book because there's more mention of hadith. It's like, hadith is not part of fiqh because that's not the game that we're playing. That's not the discussion that we're playing. We're talking about the hadith mentions stored. Give me scenarios that would be counted as stored or not stored, and then give me more scenarios and give me criteria that I can play with, right? That's the game that I'm playing in this science, right? And so what they do is they turn their back on the door and walk away, meaning they don't benefit from it. So the sheikh was like, "Yeah, I like to teach this hadith because in this book has got more hadith in it," meaning you don't know fiqh. That's what it means, right? So this is a huge problem. Is by all means compare and contrast madhahib and come to your own opinion that you agree with, by all means, but at least listen and learn and understand the game that we're playing, right? Understand the game that we're playing, right? So I'm English, right? And in England, we play rugby. And rugby is pretty violent, right? My dad's ear got ripped off like 3 times playing rugby. And so when I come to America, you're like, "Oh, you play rugby too, right? You play American football, which is rugby." That's not rugby. It's a totally different game. It's a totally different game, right? There are certain shared things, but it's actually very, very different. Very, very different. And so I don't know what you're doing. I was just like, you're just playing rugby with a helmet. It's like, no, it's not the thing at all. You don't understand the game. You don't understand the spirit of it. You don't understand the art of it. It's like, oh, when you go and play, like, oh, that's what you're doing. So what does a human being do? They look at something they don't understand, they're just like, what is that? And criticize it. So you come along and look at the Shafi school. Oh, Shafi school, they does this, it goes against this hadith. Oh, Hanafi school, they're like, Habibi, don't do that. Come in, learn, and then you'll appreciate something. Learn the game, right? There's a game that's called Arabic grammar. There's a game which is called Arabic literature. There's a game that is called this. There's a game that is called that. Play the game and understand the benefit, and you become a scholar. But if you don't play the game, you just don't understand anything, and you just close in your own mind, and you just criticize everybody, and you have like, you know, one iota of knowledge that you do, and there's some knowledge in it, and there's some benefit in it a bit, but you don't have knowledge. Does that make sense? So here we're looking at something like, this is one field, this is another field. What do we do here? What do we do here? Right? And you have to understand every science has its systems, has its paradigms, has its goals, and they're different, right? And they all play together to make something called the alim, the scholar, who looks at the deen in general and has an insight. But when you don't have this training, you just look at everything and you're just kind of arrogant and silly. Okay. It says قال محمد بهذا نأخذ من سرق ثمرا في رأس النخل أو شاة في المرعى فلا قطع عليه فإذا أوتي بالثمر الجزينة أو البيت وأوتي بالغنم المراحة وكان لها من يحفظها فجاء سارق سرق من ذلك شيئا يساوي ثمن المجن ففيه القطع والمجن كما يساوي يومئذ 10 دراهم ولا يقطع في أقل من ذلك وهو قول أبي حنيفة والعامة من فقهائنا. So Imam Muhammad says, we adhere to this: someone who steals fruits from the top of a tree or a sheep from the pasturage is not liable for amputation. But if the fruits are brought to their drying floor or to the house, and the sheep are brought to their enclosure, and there is someone to guard them. Notice he added that from nowhere, right? Like the hadith doesn't mention it. He says, yeah, but in fiqh, we're talking about the illah. What is the reason? We're saying storing, looking after. Is it normal, Habibi, to leave your sheep in a pen 10 miles away from anybody else? Like there's nobody near that. That's not a normal way to store animals. You don't store animals completely unattended. So he says, yes, they are. The hadith mentions when they go to a house. Well, obviously, this should normal practice that there should be somebody there. So he adds the criterion, right? He adds the criterion, not that it was just brought to the house, but that it was a guard there, right? And you're going to have probably a whole lot of discussions: what kind of guard, what kind of this, what kind of that, etc. Right? Then a thief comes and steals anything from it whose value amounts to that of a shield, then he is liable for amputation. And then he goes on to a second point, and there's going to be a debate here between the Kufans and the Medinans on this issue. What is the minimum amount? What is the minimum amount? So this is a second issue here. It says a shield at that time used to be worth 10 dirhams, and there was no amputation for less than that. And that is the verdict of Abu Hanifa and our fuqaha in general. The Kufans in general, their fatwa is less than 10 dirhams, which is to understand what that is, when your zakat minimum in silver, right? Your zakat minimum in silver is 200 dirhams. Okay, so the zakat minimum, I think in the US right now is about $600, right? Something like that, right? Maybe somebody can chat GPT it for me, ask Google or whatever it is, an estimation, something like $600. Okay, so zakat minimum, something like $600. So if $600 is the zakat minimum for silver dirhams, which is 200 dirhams, I'm going to divide 600 by 20, and I'm going to get to what? What's 600 divided by 20?
30.
30. Is that a lot of money? It's not a lot of money. $20 is not a lot of money, right? So key concept, yes, your hand can be cut off for not a lot of money. That's not a ridiculous amount of money. Okay, $20, right? So there is no amputation for less than that. Okay. Okay. So he's going to continue, but we'll discuss that bare minimum in a second. So this is
Sheikh, I had a
Go ahead, Bismillah, go ahead.
quick question. Like, it might be a repetition, but I was wondering, like, why, like, I guess, like, the layman Salafi people, like, I can understand them doing this, like, whether this is not Sahih, but how come it has infiltrated the ranks of the scholars? Like, they're
Um,
big scholars in Saudi, right?
yeah,
They know Arabic, they know, but I just see them saying, "Oh, Abu Hanifa said, Imam Abu Hanifa said, Imam Shafi said this, Imam Malik said this, Imam Hanbali said this. We follow this one." Like, I don't understand this.
yeah, I don't mean to generalize completely. So there are certain Salafi scholars who are strong in certain things, right? But what it means, let's say, for example, Sheikh Albani. Okay, Sheikh Albani, was he a jahil? Was he an ignorant person when it comes to hadith? No, he's not. That's not fair to say that. Okay, it's not fair to say that. He's not. He has certain opinions here and there, and people have opinions, but it's not fundamentally off on all levels. Okay, but when it comes to fiqh, it's no. Like he's just not trained in fiqh. Period. So what happens is you have somebody who knows something and is not trained in something else, and then they're given the microphone. That's all. So with the situation we are in today, right? The situation we're in today is that people are given the microphone or given the voice or made the Grand Mufti, and they aren't people. That's the situation we're in. And why do I do that? Because you give me the answer that I want. That's why. So that's the reality. That's the reality. So we're in Akhir Zaman, and so there are people who nobody would look at in the past. You're like you would kind of ignore them. Suddenly, everybody listens to them. That's how it is. That's just how it is. So basic mistakes, like an obvious basic mistake, and just nobody cares. There we go. Move on. And it's going to get worse, right? Because at least with the Salafi movement, at least morally, wants to apply the Quran and Sunnah, right? Like there's a moral reason, like there's a claim that we want to follow the Quran. So there's a conservatism, right? So I don't think the Salafi shuyukh are going to come along and say, yeah, let's have Shakira come and give a concert in Saudi. So, but, you know, I don't think they're going to do that. But now we want something else. So now it's going to get even worse. We want shuyukh that say, for example, all religions are equal. We want shuyukh that are going to come along and say, well, LGBTQ plus, there's difference of agreement. We want shuyukh. I've heard this. Shuyukh who say, yes, the former dhahib, a shuyukh will come along and say, yeah, tight clothes for women are halal. That's the fatwa that I want. Fantastic. So this is where we are. We're akhir zaman, right? Where ignorant people are given the microphone, and that's it. And it's going to get worse. That's just the nature of it. So yes, it's like, believe it or not, there was a comedy in England. Where there was a comedian, a bit like kind of Mr. Bean kind of person. He'd always get himself into weird situations, like really difficult situations. So the program was called Some Mothers Do Avam. Like, believe it or not, there are actually people who are born like this. Like, believe it or not, it does actually happen. Like some women do actually give birth to children like this. It's like, it's crazy, but it happens. That's where we are. Right? If somebody says something that's just silly, like, how could you just say that? And then there we go. So that's a situation, and so it comes down to qillat deen on some level. With the Salafis, I don't think that's really the case so much. Not qillat deen, right? Like Salafi movement has increased a lot of people's deen, I think, on some levels, right? Many people it's like that's their way to today on being religious is through the Salafi movement, right? And may Allah reward them for that and the various things. I prefer that than anything else. But but it is tajheel, spreading of ignorance. That's how it is. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ said. Dallu wa adallu. Right? It's reality. So people who are not trained, that's what it is. Even say Wahhabi movement, right? You ask even, Muhammad ibn Wahhab, Hanbali, right? He's Hanbali. And so you can imagine at his time, you can't just walk in and start saying things. But now you can just walk in and start saying things because there's enough ignorance out there. So I'm not saying that all Salafi scholars are stupid or ignorant on all levels. It's not fair to say that. Right? It's not fair to say that. But there are certain fundamental things where there is like a level of safaha, a level of stupidity on certain issues, and those issues are important. Right? Like they don't actually understand simple things on certain levels, and people like that were never allowed to speak in the past, but today, ahlan wa sahlan. Well, here's the microphone. Does that make sense in my head?
Yeah.
So yeah, we're and it's not just them. There's other groups as well. You'll find that a group they'll allow certain people to, Mufti Saab, like Sheikh Tamim Ahmadi in California. He laughed. He said, yeah, haha, my students are muftis. Like I'm not a mufti. How are my students muftis? So that's part and parcel of that. You're called mufti, you're not mufti, right? You're called Maulana, but you don't actually know that much. Like you don't actually know that much, right? And it's a problem.
Yeah. Like
So
a new thing was like I think was Yasir Qadhi was saying that the hadiths have holes in them or something. Like all of a sudden he just comes out and says these things and
yeah,
goes.
so like he will say things, and so he's like he knows. I'm not saying he doesn't know anything. So you come along and say Yasir Qadi doesn't know anything. That's a ta'meem. That's like a generalization. It's not true, right? But you say like, is he trained in Hanafi fiqh? No. Jazakumullah khair. Is he trained in Shafi fiqh? No. Jazakumullah khair. So therefore, what can I take him for? Like he has his seerah is amazing. His insight into the history. He has his whole, whole thing on Salafism that he wrote the book, right? I really want to buy the book. Very useful book. Like, so he does know things, but is he a specialist in this or a specialist in that? Right? There's the problem. Does that make sense?
Yes.
right? So it's like,
So we can read his book on Sirah.
yeah,
I
yeah,
was thinking
Sirah is
about it.
amazing. I love his book on Sirah. I love his style, very good. But it's because it's a general topic, right? The general topic.
Okay.
Yeah, his book in his Sirah, his book on Salafism. I don't know what is the history of Salafi. I can't remember what it was called. Really,
Understanding Salafism.
yeah. So it's a really good book, and it's really useful. There's many people who are really good, right? So I'm not saying that like Sheikh Omar Suleiman, he's amazing, but is he actually trained in any particular thing? I don't know what he's trained in.
I see.
So like I'm just talking about myself, okay? Like I was there in the fatwa department, okay? I was there in the fatwa department in Jordan, okay? With Sheikh Ahmad Hassanat. He's my teacher, one of my teachers, okay? And he looks at me in front of the other muftis, okay? And he says, faqih. He points at me and says, faqih, right? Sheikh Ahmad Hassanat, he was appointed by Sheikh Nuh Ali Salman, the former mufti of Jordan, right? So like, there is some checks and balances, right? As opposed to being religious, as opposed to being inspiring, as opposed to knowing a certain thing or about, for example, if somebody can quote hadiths, okay, that's fantastic. Like I know, like that doesn't really mean that much, does it? Right? Like you can, there are certain things there, like you don't know what you're talking about. And so there is a system out there, but that system has been taken apart. Okay. And in the past, you just couldn't do these things, right? You couldn't do those things. You just can't just come along and say crazy things and get away with it. Whereas now you can do that. It's not that difficult. Right? You do all sorts of things. May Allah protect us all. Okay, let's continue, inshallah. So أخبرنا مالك أخبرنا يحيى بن سعيد عن محمد بن يحيى بن حبان يحيى بن حبان أن غلاما سرق وديا من حائط رجل فغرسه في حائط سيده فخرج صاحب الودي يلتمس وديه فوجده فاستدعى عليه مروان بن الحكم فسجنه وأراد قطع يده. Another example. Um, Dr. What's his name? Dr. Khalid Blankenship, right? Dr. Khalid Blankenship, is he a scholar? He's a scholar. His PhD was on Marwan ibn Hakam, I believe. Or no, Afwan, his son, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. That was his PhD and his master's and PhD in Egypt and elsewhere. And he's a specialist in Islamic history and teaches theology. Can he give fatwa? I don't know. Can he teach hadith? I don't know. Arabic grammar? I don't know. So when you say is he a scholar? I say, yeah, he's a scholar. Is he useful? He's useful. I'd love to, if he had gave a talk, I'd love to attend his talk. It's fantastic. But what exactly am I using him for? Right? When it comes to fiqh, we need a faqih. When it comes to grammar, we need a grammarian. We need, etc. So scholar is a very general thing. It doesn't make you, scholar. Yeah, yeah, as an alim. But can I take this from him or that from him? There's other things that are very different. Does that make sense in my head?
Yes. Jazakallah.
Okay, so he says فسجنه وأراد قطع يده فانطلق سيد العبد إلى رافع ابن خديج فسأله فأخبره أنه سمع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول لا قطع في ثمر ولا كثر والكثر الجمار. قال رجل إن مروان أخذ غلامي وهو يريد قطع يده فأنا أحب أن تمشي إليه فتخبره بالذي سمعت من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فمشى معه حتى أتى مروان فقال له رافع أخذت غلام هذا؟ قال نعم. قال فما أنت صانع؟ قال أريد قطع يده. قال فإني سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول لا قطع في ثمر ولا كثر فأما مروان بالعبد فأرسل. So Malik informed us from Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Ansari. Right, so there's two Yahya ibn Sa'id, Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan, the great hadith critic of Iraq, right? And Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Ansari, right, who is the Qadi of Medina. He informed us from Muhammad ibn Yahya ibn Habban that a slave stole a small shoot or branch from a palm tree intended for replanting from a man's walled garden and planted it in his owner's walled garden. The owner of the shoot went out looking for his shoot and found it, right? Perhaps it was a big thing. He demanded of Marwan ibn Hakam, so Marwan ibn Hakam, he was Umayyad, this is during the Umayyads, he's the governor of Medina, and later on he would become the Khalifa, right? This is Marwan ibn Hakam. That he should have him, did I skip something? No, I did not. That he should have him brought before him, and so he imprisoned him and wanted to cut off his hand. The slave's owner went off to Rafi ibn Khadij and asked him, and he told him that he had heard the Messenger of Allah ﷺ saying, there is to be no amputation for fruit or for, can't even pronounce the word, spadices, whatever it is. The spadix is the heart or the pith of the palm tree. The man said, Marwan took my slave and wants to cut his hand off. So I want you to go and inform him of what you heard from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So why would he do that? Why can't he just say that I heard Rafi say that?
Repeat, Sheikh.
Why can't he just go to Marwan and say, I heard Rafi ibn Khadij say that the Prophet said that? Why can't he do that?
I guess he does not want to be liable for misinformation.
That's possible. So it could be he's wara', he's scrupulous. I don't want to quote the Prophet ﷺ. I want you to do that. Okay, why else? Would Marwan believe him?
Maybe not.
Right.
Maybe not because of not having the credentials.
Right. He might question him because, oh, it's to your benefit. You don't want your slave's hand to be cut off, etc. But what does it also tell us? It tells us that a Sahih hadith is not a fact. Right? So, give me 1 second, please. My apologies. So what does it tell us? It tells us that in the minds of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, a Sahih hadith is reliable, but it's not fact. It is what we call dhanni, is called probabilistic. So he is trying to reduce the possible error of this dhanni, probabilistic piece of information, which is a Sahih hadith, by having the person quote it and shortening the chain. So the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, they understood that a Sahih hadith is not a fact. So again, miss kind of concept we find with Salafis is hadith, khalas, for a hadith, it's fact. It's not fact, it's dhann, right? It is probabilistic evidence. We all understood that. The Sahaba understood that. Sayyidina Umar understood that. Everybody understood that. And so they'll create, they say this thing, oh, the Sahaba and the Salaf, whenever they heard a hadith, they just follow it. No, they would often do the opposite. I believe it was A'mash or Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. They said, I never heard of anybody who knew more hadith and then didn't act upon it than so and so, because they actually had a critical approach to hadith. And so he's saying, like, Marwan ibn Hakam, he's a qadi, he's a governor. He's dealing with hadith, and he's going to look at this hadith and deal with it. He knows that it's probabilistic. and may or not be applied. So I'm trying to reduce the error in it by having you come. So there's just one person between you. Okay, what about us when there's 10 people? We have a hadith in Bukhari of 7 people between us and the Prophet ﷺ. So obviously, any hadith could be wrong, right? Any Sahih hadith could be wrong, right? Just in the class, was it last night or the night before in Sharh al-Tirmidhi? Tirmidhi says, yeah, everybody makes mistakes, right? Like everybody. Like the great scholars make mistakes. So obviously, any hadith could have an error in it if it's not mass transmitted, because any person could misquote the Prophet ﷺ, and it happens for the best of them, let alone anybody else. Okay, so that's an important concept there, right? So he said, I mean to cut off his hand, and then he said, no, there's no amputation for fruits or for spade. I don't know how to pronounce it. So Marwan ordered the slave be set free. So Imam Malik is not saying the hadith is there. Imam Malik saying is the hadith is there and it was applied in Medina. Okay, what if the hadith is there but not applied in Medina? No, thank you. That's Imam Malik's approach, right? قال محمد وهذا نأخذ لا قطع في ثمن معلق في شجر ولا في كثر والكثر الجمار ولا في ودي ولا في شجر وهو قول أبي حنيفة. And notice he doesn't say ولا عامة من فقهائنا, right? Imam Muhammad says we adhere to this. There is no amputation for our fruits still attached to the tree, nor for the spadix, whatever it is, nor for the shoot or branch intended for replanting, etc. And this is the verdict for Imam Hanifa. And he doesn't say, and this is what we do in Kufa. Right? So sometimes Imam Muhammad says this is the Kufan way. There is a tradition that is coming before the Hanafi school, and it exists before the Hanafi school, a set of answers, a set of principles, a set of discussions that precede the Hanafi school, right? And that's called the Kufan school. And there are some things that are Imam Abu Hanifa himself. He's not just narrating the discussion, he's had an opinion. So perhaps there's a debate among the Kufans. Some say yes and some say no. And he's saying, this is our opinion, and this is the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa. So inshallah, next week we'll continue. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.